Johnny Depp had always been a man who found solace in the quiet moments between the chaos of his career. Airports, however, were never quiet. The loudspeaker announcements, the scuffling of hurried footsteps, and the hushed but urgent whispers of travelers always created an atmosphere of constant motion. But on this particular evening, as he waited for his connecting flight at Los Angeles International Airport, something unusual caught his eye. A small child, no older than 6 or 7, stood alone near the large floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the night sky. His tiny hands were clenched into fists, his blonde hair slightly tousled as if he'd been running. The boy's eyes darted around the terminal, filled with something between fear and confusion. Johnny recognized that look. It was the same one he'd seen in the mirror many times as a child, lost in a world that didn't make sense. Instinctively, Johnny stepped forward. He had no idea why, but something about the boy compelled him. As he approached, the child turned sharply, startled by the presence of the Hollywood star. "Hey, buddy," Johnny said softly, crouching down to meet the boy's gaze. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The boy hesitated, his lips trembling. "I don't know," he whispered. His voice was barely audible above the hum of the airport. Johnny frowned. "Do you remember your name?" The boy nodded slowly. "Ethan." "Okay, Ethan. We're going to find your parents, all right?" Ethan bit his lip but nodded again. Johnny stood and looked around, expecting to see a frantic mother or father nearby. But no one seemed to be searching for a missing child. He glanced at the airport staff nearby, but they were too busy with the usual routine to notice. Something wasn't right. He took Ethan's small hand in his, feeling the boy's fingers tighten around his own. Together, they walked toward the information desk. As they approached, Johnny saw a police officer speaking with an airline employee. He stepped forward. "Excuse me, officer," Johnny said, gesturing toward Ethan. "I think this little guy might be lost." The officer looked down at the child, his expression instantly softening. "Hey there, kiddo. What's your name?" "Ethan," the boy answered quietly. "Do you know your last name?" Ethan hesitated. I think it's Reynolds." Johnny noticed the officer's slight shift in demeanor. His eyebrows furrowed for just a moment before he masked his surprise. The name seemed familiar to him too, but he couldn't quite place it. "We'll check our system and make an announcement," the officer said, guiding them toward a more private waiting area. Johnny could have walked away then, but something held him there. A gut feeling, and Johnny Depp had learned long ago to trust his gut. As the minutes passed, more officers arrived, their hushed conversations raising Johnny's suspicions. He knelt beside Ethan again. "You're doing great, buddy," he assured him. "Do you remember where you last saw your parents?" Ethan's brow furrowed. "I don't know," he said again, his frustration evident. "I was with my grandpa, but then he was gone." Johnny exchanged a look with the officer. "Grandpa?" The officer exhaled slowly. "Mr. Depp, I think we might have just stumbled onto something much bigger than a lost child." Johnny felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" The officer hesitated before answering. "There was a missing child case 30 years ago. A boy named Ethan Reynolds disappeared from this very airport. His grandfather was the prime suspect, but neither of them were ever found." Johnny's heart pounded in his chest as he looked down at the boy, who clung tightly to his hand. A decades-old mystery, and somehow, against all odds, it had found its way into Johnny Depp's path, and he was determined to uncover the truth. Johnny sat down beside Ethan, his mind racing. "Ethan, do you remember anything else about your grandfather?" The boy nodded hesitantly. "He always told me stories about airplanes. He said we were going on a big adventure." Johnny's grip tightened around Ethan's hand. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but there were still too many missing details. He turned to the officer. "Can we check security footage from the past few hours? Maybe we can see who Ethan came with." The officer nodded and radioed in the request. As they waited, Johnny did his best to keep Ethan calm, telling him lighthearted stories from his own childhood. But beneath his warm smile, his mind churned with possibilities. If this truly was the same Ethan Reynolds from 30 years ago, how was it possible that he hadn't aged a day? The security footage arrived, and as they watched, a grainy image appeared on the screen. Ethan was seen holding hands with an elderly man, walking through the terminal. But as the footage continued, something chilling happened. The man simply vanished. One moment, he was there. The next, he was gone. Johnny and the officer exchanged uneasy glances. Something beyond their understanding was at play here, and Johnny knew he couldn't walk away from it. Determined to find answers, Johnny resolved to stay with Ethan until they uncovered the truth behind the decades-old mystery. The airport, once just a stop on his journey, had now become the beginning of an adventure he never expected. As Johnny dug deeper into Ethan's past, he reached out to a private investigator, someone he had worked with before on other personal matters. The investigator, named Sam Hendricks, agreed to meet them at Johnny's hotel. That night, as Johnny and Ethan settled into the suite, Ethan clung to Johnny's hand. "I don't want to be alone," he whispered. "You won't be," Johnny assured him. "We'll figure this out together." The next morning, Sam arrived with a thick file in hand. "Johnny, you're not going to believe this," he said, placing the file on the table. Inside were newspaper clippings, police reports, and old photographs of Ethan Reynolds. Every detail matched the boy standing beside Johnny, down to the birthmark on his wrist. "But how?" Johnny asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How is this possible?" "There's one lead," Sam said. Ethan's grandfather, Henry Reynolds, was obsessed with time travel. He was a scientist who went missing under mysterious circumstances. Some believe he found a way to bend time itself. Johnny's head spun. "You're saying Ethan might be from the past? Or lost in time?" Sam replied grimly. Ethan looked up at Johnny with wide eyes. "Does this mean I'll never find my family?" Johnny placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "No, buddy. It means we have to find a way to bring you home." And so, Johnny Depp embarked on a journey unlike any he had ever known. A journey through forgotten stories, hidden truths, and the mystery of a boy who had stepped out of time itself.